Hi all, hope you're well. I'm going to do a slightly different video this time, and it's going to be about a little bit of post-production, so a little bit of work on the computer. I'm going to show you how to convert a RAW file using Photoshop full program, although the process is pretty similar regardless of whether you're using the full Photoshop program or Photoshop Elements. And the reason I wanted to do this is because I think using RAW files is a really great way to get the best out of your images. So there's lots of ways you can record an image file. You can shoot as a JPEG file, sometimes a TIFF file depending on what camera you've got, and RAW files. Now JPEG files are really convenient and very good, especially if you shoot a really good JPEG file, really good quality file. But I do think that shooting RAW files is the best thing because you get the best quality image with the most flexibility when it comes to post-processing those images. So what I thought I'd do this time is just spend a few minutes running through just a single image that I recorded as a RAW file, converting it into a file format that any other program can use. So it's basically a video about RAW file conversions. So in a minute I'm going to fire up Photoshop and we'll run through just the basic tab. There's loads and loads of things you can do with a RAW file, and over the next few weeks and months I may well do a few more post-production videos, but this is going to be the real basics. And for most images, if you get it right in camera, and it's still important to get the picture right in camera, get the exposure right, the focusing right, obviously composition and everything else, you're going to have a great basic file to work from. And what the RAW file does is, if you capture it as a RAW file, it gives you much more opportunities to tweak that RAW file and get it to look really great. So you've got a picture that's got impact, it's got mood, and when people look at it they go, wow, this is a fantastic picture. Initially when you get the RAW file up on the screen, it looks a bit flat. In fact, it looks a lot flatter and less vibrant than a JPEG file, because with the JPEG files lots of little bits of post-production going on in camera. So you might set the sharpening levels in camera, the white balance, the contrast, the colour saturation, all those sorts of things. Whereas with a RAW file, it's that basic raw data, and all those adjustments you have to make yourself when you get it into the RAW file converter. So that's what this next few minutes is all about. I really hope you enjoy it, and I hope it helps to sort of explain why I think RAW files are so good and why I think they can actually help to move your photography onto the next level. As I say, it's important to get a good subject and shoot that subject well with a good composition, good light, good exposure, and all the basic techniques you'd normally do as a photographer. But if you shoot in a RAW file, it gives you those extra pieces of flexibility when it comes to the post-production side, and you can really make that image sing, and people are going to go, wow, this is fantastic. So again, I'm going to shut up for now. I'm going to switch to Photoshop, and I'll run through the basic RAW file conversion. As I say, it is only the beginning of the process. There's loads of other things you can do with Photoshop. It's an enormous program, and that goes for Photoshop full program, Lightroom, and also the cut down version of Photoshop, which is Elements, which is also a really good program. So, but I would urge you to, even though you might not do much to your images, I think most digital pictures or digital images or digital files need a little bit of a tweak to get the best out of them. So this sort of is the first step on that sort of post-production journey. So I'll shut up for now and switch to Photoshop. I'll speak to you soon, guys. Okay, so excuse my croaky voice, I've got a bit of a sore throat at the moment, but hopefully that will go soon. So we're in the main Photoshop program now, and the first thing we have to do is obviously go up to File and Open and navigate to the RAW file that we want to convert. And I've got the folder open, so it doesn't really matter which one we pick here, but we'll pick this picture of Chroma Peer. Left click on that and then left click on Open. And what will happen is that picture will open straight up into the RAW file converter, which is here. It doesn't open into the main workspace, it goes straight into the converter, and as you can see we've got this panel up, and all we're going to do is look at the first panel today, like the basic options. There's lots of other things you can do with the RAW file converter, but we'll just look at the basics. Now this picture looks a little bit flat, and the reason for that is because it's had no post-production done whatsoever. It's the raw data from the camera. When you shoot a JPEG file, lots of things have already been done in camera. such as sharpening, colour saturation and all that sort of stuff. But with the raw file, none of that's been done at all. So that means that we've got to make those adjustments ourselves. And we're going to use this first panel to do that. And the first thing we need to look at is the white balance, which is at the top here. Now when you shoot a JPEG file, you pick the white balance option that you want, such as cloudy or shade or sunny day, and all the other ones are discarded. With a raw file, not only does it save the one that you've picked, it saves all the other raw file options as well, which is quite useful because this is a really flexible way to work. And it means that we can make tweaks to the colour balance a lot more easily in a raw file than we could with a JPEG file. So if you look at that little triangle on the side there, if we left click on that, you can see all those white balance options have been saved, and I can pick any one of those because this is a raw file, not a JPEG file. So I can pick cloudy, which will warm the image up a little bit, or I can left click again and I can click shade, which will make the picture a little bit more yellowy, orange and red, or if I wanted to I could pick tungsten, which will make the picture go blue. But the thing is, by using a raw file, I can pick any one of these options after I've taken the picture, which is really useful. I can also set a custom white balance by using one of these sliders. So they're all my white balance options, but if I want to set a custom white balance, I can use these sliders. Now, I wouldn't normally use the magenta tilt slider. You'd only really use that if you had a green tint to the picture or a magenta tint, otherwise it can result in unnatural colours. The one we do want to use though is the one at the top, which is a temperature slider. And if I left click and pull that slider to the right, it makes the picture warmer, more yellowy orange. You will notice that if I put it to the left, it makes the picture bluer. So we can adjust those sliders to get the exact colour temperature we want. By making the picture a bit warmer, I do bring in a bit of overexposure, because if you can see where that little red bit is, that's an overexposure warning. It's like a highlight alert. And if I left click on that little triangle, that turns that option on and off. So if I left click, it turns it on, and that little red area tells me I've got a little bit of overexposure, which we'll need to get rid of at some stage. If I click on the other triangle on the left hand side, that will tell me whether I've got either any underexposure. So the dark areas of the picture, if they were too dark, they would go blue. But there isn't any underexposure. This is a reasonably well exposed picture, apart from that little bit of overexposure at the top of the picture where the artificial light is. So exposure wise, not too bad. And if you look at the histogram, that looks pretty good. We've got more or less all our highlight exposure correct, and all our shadow exposure and our midtones. Tiny bit of overexposure, which is easily dealt with because this is a raw file. So the next block of sliders are to do with the overall contrast and brightness and darkness of the picture, and that's what we're going to look at next. So the exposure slider is a bit of a blunt tool really, because if I use this slider and move it to the right, it will brighten up the whole picture, every pixel in the image. And if I slide it to the left, it makes the whole thing darker. So there might be areas of the picture that are fine, that I don't want to darken or brighten. In this case, overexposed, and in this case, underexposed. So it's a bit of a blunt tool, so I'm going to leave that on 0. And the contrast slider is very similar. It will increase the contrast over the whole picture. So it will change the contrast in every single pixel of that picture. And there might be some areas that are quite contrasty already, like these dark areas on the bottom of the pier. And I don't want to increase that contrast. But if I slide it to the right, the contrast increases everywhere. And not only that, I'm starting to get a little bit of overexposure. If I slide it to the left, every pixel gets low contrast and it makes the picture too weak and wishy-washy. So I'm not a great fan of the contrast slider. I use it very sparingly. The next 3 or 4 sliders are really useful. I've got the highlight slider, and what that does is it increases the highlight exposure in just the bright areas of the picture, or it darkens just the bright areas of the picture, and it leaves the rest of the image alone. So it means I can just adjust the highlights. And by pulling this slider to the left, I can darken down the highlights and get rid of some of that overexposure in that artificial light. The shadow slider does the same. It either darkens the dark areas of the picture on their own or brightens the dark areas. And if you look here, I've darkened the dark areas too much because they've gone blue, which shows underexposure. So we'll pull that back out again. And by moving it slightly to the right, I can get a bit more detail in the shadows without affecting the highlights at the picture. The white slider and the black slider is very similar. The white slider darkens the white areas or brightens the white areas, leaves the rest of the picture unaffected, and the black slider darkens the black areas or lightens the black areas, and it leaves the highlights and midtones alone. So again, it's a really flexible tool because by using these sliders, if you look, by pulling it to the left, I've darkened all the shadows because the area went blue, and it shows me the picture would have been underexposed. But by pulling it to the right, I can just open up the shadows or brighten up those dark areas without affecting the midtones or the highlights of the picture. So by using those sliders, I can darken or lighten the bright areas without affecting the midtones and shadows. I can brighten and darken the shadows, again without affecting other parts of the image. Now, the clarity slider is brilliant. I really like the clarity slider because what it does is it increases the contrast in just the areas of the picture that have got weak contrast. Whereas that contrast slider increases the contrast over the whole picture, the clarity slider just picks the low contrast pixels and increases the contrast in just those pixels. So again, it's really, really flexible. And I can give this picture a much more bite without affecting those strong areas of contrast that we already had. Now I've got a little bit more underexposure come up in those dark areas by using the clarity slider, but that's not a problem because I can use the shadow slider to just open those shadows up again. And now this picture's got a lot more bite and a lot more contrast without affecting the areas that are already okay. Which brings me on to the last two, and these two sliders affect colour. We've got saturation and vibrance. Now again, the saturation slider affects the colour saturation or boosts the colour saturation for the whole picture, every single pixel. And if I go too far, that picture looks really unnatural. If I go to the left, it reduces the colour saturation, but we're just going to boost it a little bit so the picture doesn't look unnatural, about +10 I think. And then I'm going to finish off by using the vibrance slider. And again, what the vibrance slider does is this: it boosts the colour saturation in just the pixels that have got weaker colour saturation. So it's a really flexible tool. So by left clicking on this slider and pulling it to the right, it will just increase the colour saturation in the areas that need it, and that leaves the other colours alone. And I think it's a really great way to give the colour saturation a bit more punch without it being too unnatural. So if we pull it back a little bit, that's looking great. So now that picture's got a lot more impact, a lot more mood, it's got a better colour balance, it's got a better colour saturation, and that's because we've used a raw file. Raw files are a really, really flexible way to make your digital images have a lot more impact, a lot more mood, and a lot more bite. So I would really urge you to shoot with raw files. There's nothing not to be gained. JPEG files are great if you shoot a good quality JPEG, but raw files I think are the king. And then all we have to do next is click on Open Image, and then that image will open up into the main Photoshop workspace. From here I can crop the image, I can take any dust spots out, I can use the dodge and burn tools, I can do all sorts of things. Photoshop is an enormous program and there's so much you can do with it. This particular picture I would probably crop it a little bit and make it a little bit more panoramic, but as this video is just about that raw file conversion, I'm not going to worry about that now. In the weeks and months to follow, if anybody's interested, I may well do a few sort of more post-production videos and add them onto my YouTube channel. So I hope you enjoyed this today. A little bit different. As I say, I apologise, my voice is a bit croaky. Hopefully over the next few days it'll get better and I'll be back to my normal voice. But as I say, raw files are a great flexible way of working. The only downside is they take more room up on the memory card, but you know, memory's cheap now, so I don't think that's a big issue. So thanks for watching and listening, guys, and I'll speak to you soon. Hi guys, so that's about it. So that's a basic raw file conversion. As I say, there's so much more you can do with Photoshop, Lightroom, Photoshop Elements. It's literally just the basic conversion of a raw file. But hopefully you can see that the after image is better than the before image. So it gives you a lot of flexibility. And I think it's that flexibility of working that makes raw files so useful. What I'll do at the end of this vlog, I'll put the standard sort of unedited raw file up, and then next to it I'll put the edited raw file, and you'll be able to sort of look you know, one after the other and see the difference between the two. So yeah, I really hope you've enjoyed this. Bit different this week. Again, really apologise for the croaky voice. Hopefully that'll be back to normal quite soon. So if you've enjoyed this vlog, please consider, if you haven't already, subscribing to my channel. If you've got any comments about the vlog or anything in general about photography, please leave them below in the comments section. That would be great. It's always good to hear from you guys. And if you can like or share this vlog, that would be fantastic. So I think that's it for the moment. So bye for now, and I'll speak to you soon, guys.